More than a few eyebrows are going up tonight over newly released documents from Boeing related to the 737 MAX and pilot training.
King 5's Glenn Farley's been looking over these documents. He's here tonight with what they contain. Some of it's shocking, Glenn.
Some of it is pretty shocking, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of it right here. Now, much of what is in these documents is highly technical. Some of it you would expect, but not everything. One employee writing, "This airplane is designed by clowns who in turn are supervised by monkeys." Now, these documents are in the hands of Congress.
When the first 737 MAX took off to begin flight testing, the idea was to deliver to the airlines a plane that would fly and handle just like the previous model, that wouldn't require much extra training. But these documents released by Boeing talk a lot about the difficult process of getting there, and exchanges of emails and text messages between pilots and engineers. The names have been redacted, but one from 2017 goes like this. "I'm putting out fires with the blank person who suddenly thinks they need simulator training to fly the MAX. Arr!" Ironically, this week, Boeing did an about-face and says it wants to have pilots complete MAX-specific simulator training for when the grounded jet flies again. In another exchange raising concerns, "I don't know how to refer to the very, very few of us on the program who are interested in only the truth, but it's mostly depressing it's been so few." The regulators mention often with sentiments like, "I'm not hopeful. The FAA inspector was briefed by blank, and it was negative from the get-go, whining about the number of DRs, not Boeing quality, etc. But this is what happens when people fold when they should be standing firm. Integrity should not be cast aside when pressured." So is this just how the sausage is made, or something more troubling?
You think, in retrospect, it was a mistake to not inform pilots of the existence of the MCAS system?
We made some mistakes.
This exchange in the House Transportation Committee, which grilled now ousted Boeing CEO Dennis Muhlenberg in late October. The documents again putting Boeing's credibility on the line. In a statement, the company says, "We regret the content of these communications and apologize to the FAA, Congress, and our airline customers, and to the flying public for them. The language used in these communications and some of the sentiments they express are inconsistent with Boeing's values, and the company is taking appropriate action in response."
Boeing saying its own investigation is not finished. Some of those in these pages facing potential disciplinary action or worse, as the grounding of the 737 MAX is now 10 months old. Oregon Congressman Peter DeFazio, whom you saw in that piece asking questions as the chair of the House Transportation Committee. We were at that hearing, and we expect there's going to be a lot more.